section. I will be going through that in the end to see if I've missed any questions. And we're just real excited. All right, what have I got going? All right, so good morning. My name is Carolyn Knight. I am with the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. In fact, I run the education and outreach programs, and welcome to Birding Basics. So this is a program we're going to be doing about weekly videos on everything you need to know as a new birder, whether you are just starting your birding adventure prior to our great shutdown, our shelter in place, or if you had intended on picking up this hobby or just now finding the time to do so, if you have just started now that you're at home all of the time to notice the fluffy dinosaurs moving around in your backyard, in your local park, flying by your window, and want to learn a little bit more about them. We are here for that. We want to get your questions answered. We want to make sure that you are set up with the fundamentals so you are just ready to go. So today we are going to be talking about equipment, what you need to do the thing. We're not going to be going too deeply into any of these subject matters, but we want to give you enough that you can get started so that you can feel confident making the decisions equipment-wise. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is optics. So we're not going to be delving too deeply in this. Optics is a subject matter that birders can and will talk your ear off about it, and are more than happy to do so. But I want to make sure that you guys know what's going on here. So the first thing we're going to be talking about are binoculars. These are the birder's safety blanket. Never leave home without them. You cannot identify what you can't see, and our binoculars are the keys to that. So there are two numbers you should be aware of on your binoculars. They're usually at the top here. My pair of binoculars lost that cap somewhere in the Central Valley a few years ago on a far too early morning birding expedition. But these are 10s by 42s. The first number in that sequence tells you the magnification of your binoculars, how closely things are going to look when you look through them. And the second number, that 42 on this pair, is the distance across this ocular lens. Tells you how much light is going to come through. That's a really important thing to be aware of. If you're going to be doing early morning, late night birding, doing some owling, that light is going to allow you to see more clearly in certain conditions, but for most birding, you're going to be looking at a set of binoculars that's either going to be a 7 or 8 in magnification and either a 35 or 42, anywhere in that range. It's really easy to go overboard with things like magnification with your binoculars. There's some really crazy binoculars out there, but anything larger than an 8 means you're going to be spending a lot of time staring at things like leaves or clouds while searching for your bird. So closer's not always better. When you are deciding on buying a pair of binoculars, it's really important to pay attention, once again, to that magnification. You don't really want to go larger than 8, especially if you're just starting out. It takes some practice to look through your binoculars successfully, be able to spot birds with just your bare eyes, and then bring your binoculars up and see them as quickly as possible. You're going to have to get used to your pair of binoculars, but this is really something that should be done in person. I realize right now that's not really a great option for any of us. We're all trying to flatten that curve, do our part, and stay inside, avoid unnecessary human contact or mixing in the public, but it's something that for binoculars is really important. You need to try out your pair. There are different brands, there are different models within those brands. What works for someone is not going to work for you necessarily. Everybody's got different faces, everybody's got different preferences, so you should really try before you buy. There's some really great local shops with very knowledgeable staff, places like the Los Gatos Birdwatcher, where they're more than happy to let you try out binoculars so you can get a feel for how to use them, how they're going to feel carrying them around. When you're buying your binoculars, weight is definitely a concern. Bird walks are not fast necessarily. If you're going on a bird walk for a hike, you might be a little frustrated because birders tend to stand in one place for a while, staring up into trees or at bushes. But the binoculars do get heavy after a while, so weight's definitely a concern. I'm also going to recommend finding a pair that is waterproof or weatherproof. Birds do not care about rain. Even if it is pouring out, the likelihood is, unless it's super, super windy, there's going to be birds out. That's actually one of the best times to find birds. They're very active. If your equipment is not waterproof, you're going to have a really miserable time for the next week or so with your binoculars sitting in a bag of rice on your kitchen counter, and you're just hoping that the fog clears up inside of them. Speaking from personal experience, not a super fun time. With the shelter in place, though, as I mentioned, not really an option to go out and buy them, so we have shelter-in-place edition binoculars. 3 guesses as to what these are made out of, but once again, we've got our magnification number. Now, on these ones, these are 1 by 40, so they're 40 millimeters across. That's how much light's coming in from our ocular lens, and it's a 1x magnification. So this isn't going to get you any closer to the bird, but the narrowed range of vision does actually help you pay attention to just the bird and not all of the things that are moving around in the background. It's also a really fun craft project to do with the kids. If you're stuck inside, then they've got their own pair of binoculars that you don't have to worry about them dropping. They can decorate them, and then they're doing bird watching with you too. Speaking from experience, these are what I use when I'm doing a field trip with kindergarten or first grade students. My docents and I will also have our own pair of paper tube binoculars because we want to be sure that we're birding at the same level. We're not seeing something that's way too far out for the students to see. So have some fun with it. Another piece of optic equipment that you'll see pretty frequently with bird watching is the scope. Now, this is a really cool piece of equipment. It's going to give you better magnification than your binoculars are capable of. They usually come with tripods because they are heavy as all get out. With that greater magnification comes the need to make sure it's stable. The farther things are away, the more any amount of jostling affects your field of view. There are different models of scopes. There are ones that have you viewing at an angle, ones that, like this one, which are straight through, and those are personal preference. Scopes are far more expensive than binoculars tend to run. They're something that's really beneficial if you are doing birding that is going to be really far out there. If you are on a pelagic trip, the scope is your friend, more so than your binoculars, because those birds are going to be miles away from you. But they're heavy on a hike. They're not something I would recommend if you are hiking and birding in a heavily forested area. You're just not going to get the distance needed to utilize that magnification. The birds you're going to be seeing probably aren't going to be large enough to warrant a scope. A scope is really good if you know you're going to have birds that are sitting in one place for a while. It takes a little while to set up. One of the benefits of scopes is you can share them. If you're on a walk with Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society, oftentimes our field trips are going to have at least one person with a scope, and they're more than happy to share them. They'll set it up. Everybody gets a chance to look at the bird in the scope, which is really great because, once again, it's a much closer view of that bird. You can talk about the field marks that you're seeing with the group. Of course, not super great for physical or social distancing, so that's a concern at this point as well. My recommendation, if you're just starting out as a birder, Binoculars are what you're going to want to invest in over a scope. You're going to have a lot more opportunities to fully utilize your binoculars. You can carry it around with you. They shouldn't be too heavy. Have a friend who has a scope, right? You're going to be going out and birding with other people. So hopefully somebody already has a scope. You can be a really awesome person and offer to help them carry it because they do get heavy. But that way you don't have to invest in your own. You can get a feel for them and see whether or not that's something you want to explore further. Cameras in birding are a really great tool. There's a number of really excellent Bay Area photography groups that focus on birds. The Bay Area Bird Photographers is one of them. You can find out more information about them on Audubon's website, scvas.org. They've got a ton of people involved that are more than happy to help if you're just getting into it. It's a real investment, but the benefit of using a camera, even if you're just taking potato quality shots of birds that are flitting away, zipping around, and you just kind of getting a blurred shot that's sort of terrible, is they can still help you practice your identification. And if you're really stuck, you just don't know what that bird is, it makes it really easy to share with other people, whether online or you shoot Audubon an email. That will allow us to help you get an identification, learn a little bit more from that sighting without relying on your memory of the bird. So, the next part of equipment that we're going to be talking about is your references. Basically, how you know what it is you're looking at as a birder. So one of the first references I want to talk to you guys about is other people. Birding is a lot more social than you would think it would be. Our idea of a birder is generally a middle-aged guy standing out in a field alone. Let's be honest here. But there's a lot of opportunities to meet your fellow birders. Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society does around a dozen free field trips every month. Obviously this isn't going on right now. We're also adhering to the shelter in place, but that's not going to last forever. And when the shelter in place is lifted, we would love to see you out there. We have a lot of fun with our field trips. Our field trip leaders are experts not just on the birds that you're going to be seeing, but also on the locations you're exploring. And it's a really fun way to explore some of the really awesome parks that are just hidden across our county in a really wide variety of habitats. But the benefit of bird walks is, one, socialization. People are social animals, so that's a fun part of it. But it's also an opportunity to learn more from people who may have more experience with you than you do. You'll be able to spot things that you would have otherwise missed. You're able to ask questions about an identification if you're not sure how it is they got to that identification of a species. And you can get some really great tips and tricks for remembering, oh, the Townsend's warbler has this specific face mask on it. Those details that you might otherwise miss or just kind of gloss over if you're studying these birds on your own. Everybody's got different tricks, and the sharing of those is really what makes it a special opportunity. So, other people at this point are kind of limited to the internet. So obviously, Audubon Society is one of those resources. If you've got bird questions, please send them our way. We love answering questions, whether they're about bird behaviors, identification. If you've got nesting questions, it is breeding season. We've got a ton of activity that's going on because of that. All sorts of weird behaviors and cool things that our birds are doing. But a lot of that actual meeting people is going to have to wait a little while, so I'm going to take you to your next resource, which is field guides. Everybody's got a favorite. Those vary from person to person. Personally, I'm a big fan of Nat Geo, but field guides are super, super important. They're what you take obviously, into the field with you. They're your quick references for birds. They're going to have information on the range maps, the field marks, the behaviors and habitats of our birds, even the calls. Now, there's field guides that are photo-based, so you get a single or 1 or 2 shots of the bird in real life, doing its natural behavior, standing with its typical posture, in its natural habitat, which is really helpful. And then you've got illustrated guides. Now, the benefit of illustrated guides is while you're not seeing them necessarily in their most natural posture, you are going to get a really good overview of all of their field marks. The issue that comes up with photography-based field guides is you have issues with natural lighting. Sometimes the light, particularly if a bird is gray or has iridescence, that lighting can change how that bird looks. And you're looking at an individual bird. There is individual variation within species. Some birds may have more vibrant white markings. Others may have darker blacks. There's a whole ton of variation that can be very, very subtle. You may not even notice it, but can be enough to throw off a confident identification. Whereas the birds in our illustrated field guides are the birdiest bird of that species. The best example, it's going to have all of those field marks very well defined for you. So you may find that slightly more useful, but once again, it's personal preference. Now, of course, I can't talk about field guides without also talking about the phone apps. There's a ton available based on your location. They run on Android as well as Apple, things like Merlin Bird ID. Audubon's got a really great field guide as well. The benefit to using a phone app, you're already carrying your phone with you. It's a heck of a lot lighter than your field guide is going to be, taking up way less space. And you can do things like play those calls. Now, that's something that you should always be cautious with, particularly at this time of the year. Playing, it's called playback, but playing birdsong can lead to stressing birds out, particularly if they are territorial, which many of them are at this point because it is breeding and nesting season. They're displaying for a mate. They're trying to protect their nest. If there's suddenly a newcomer in the neighborhood, they want to know about it, and that gets all of those stress hormones ramped up. So you want to be super cautious about that, but it is useful if you're trying to find a bird. Once again, your phone is going to be with you. It's light. Some concerns may be data usage. And to be honest, I really enjoy using an actual field guide. I find it easier to actually find a bird, particularly if you're not sure what it is you're looking at. You can just flip through it really easily. Compare back and forth between common species. Now, a lot of our apps are now developing kind of a describe your bird to us, and we'll try and get you in the right direction, and that is super useful, but sometimes your memory might be off, and it's not always 100% reliable. Benefit to the field guide, it's heavy enough that you can fend off several meso predators with it. Don't use your phone to fend off raccoons. Just run away. But once again, weight is always a concern when you're birding, if just because you're going to be out there for a while. Another thing to be aware of in the reference world are going to be the books that live on your shelf. These are going to be heavier. They're going to have more information for you, which is always great. You can learn more about the species, and I'm of the opinion that every opportunity you see a bird, it should be one you take to learn a little bit more about it, increase your knowledge of that species, and your reference books, those books that stay on your shelf that do not go out into the field with you, are really where you can brush up on that after you've been birding. So I'm talking about things like the Breeding Bird Atlas. Don't ever take this into the field. It is 4 pounds. The only use you'll have for it is, once again, if you need to bludgeon things. It's heavy. It's also filled with some super cool information on all of the birds that breed in our county, with really helpful maps based on timing, densities. You've got a whole life history of the California quail here. So that's super, super cool and great to have as a reference. But not something you want to carry with you on the field. There's also things like the Crossley ID guides, which will take entire families of specific birds, in this case waterfowl, and you can compare them. You can learn a whole bunch about their life histories, way more than you ever could have just relying on your field guide. But once again, it's a very heavy book. It's not going to go out with you in the field. Of course, I can't talk about references without also mentioning the internet. The internet is a really great tool for birding. It's how we're currently talking to you right now. But there's a ton of sites available to help increase your knowledge as a birder, to help you be a better birder, and how to connect with other birders. As I said, birding's a lot more social than you would initially think it is. We have rare bird listservs. So if you're really looking to find those rare birds in the county when they show up, you can subscribe to those. You'll get emails whenever there's a rare bird spotted where it's at. There are social media birding groups on places like Reddit and Facebook that are just birders sharing their sightings, sharing their photographs, talking to each other. Obviously, Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society is a great resource to find more field trips, to interact with other birders. Websites like allaboutbirds.org, that's a website run by Cornell. And got a picture. And it's a really good resource if you're trying to figure out your birds, you're trying to learn your birds. It is specific to North America, but if you're a local birder, that's all you really need, right? And it's run by the Cornell Lab. And of course, I can't talk about birding websites without also mentioning eBird. eBird is how we keep track of our lists, our sightings. It's how we figure out what birds are in our neighborhood. I'm going to have an entire talk about eBird and why it's awesome and super important to you as a birder, particularly a birder who's just getting started. So we're not going to go into too much detail today, but that is going to be a whole other video just on eBird and lists. And of course, you can't do any of this without the birds itself. Out of all of the materials I have talked about, all of your resources, your equipment, the birds themselves are the most important. You can be a birder without a field guide. You can be a birder even without binoculars. You can't be a birder without the birds themselves. And luckily, they're everywhere. You may have noticed birds flying around behind me. One of the best ways to bring the birds to you is with a feeder. That can be seed, that can be suet. Hummingbird feeders are really great and easy. So bringing those birds to you, or going to where the birds are, is one of the most important things. Now, we're limited right now to our neighborhoods. This is not the time to be going out to your state parks with your binoculars and your field guide ready to get all gung-ho about finding your birds, learning more about them. This is a great time to get your basics in on your yard birds. So at the end of every video, I am going to be talking about one bird in particular that is common to yard birds. I'm going to try and keep this so it's relevant to you whether or not you are living in the city in an apartment, if you're out in the suburbs, if you're living in the foothills or on the bay, trying to get the yardiest of the yard birds. So today, we're talking about the house finch. Now, the house finch is one of those ubiquitous birds that kind of blends into the background after a while. This is a sparrow-sized bird, and if you're just getting started, for your reference, that's a small bird that would fit in about your hand with a couple inches to spare for you to hold it. They're about 5 inches long, give or take. And of course, the length of a bird that's mentioned in a field guide is the tip of the beak to the tail, so not always the most useful number, but a sparrow-sized bird, so one that'll fit in your hand. And of course, they come in 2 varieties. We've got our super snazzy male That's that red flushed bird on the feeder. And then we have our female. She's a little bit more subtle. But you can see on both of them that they've got some really great stripes that go all the way down the chest. And they lack any really distinct facial markings. When you're dealing with birds that are sparrow-sized, our little brown jobs, it's really helpful to pay attention to where those stripes are. I've got a very angry Buick wren in the background that's hissing at me right now. That's what that sound is, if anyone was curious. But our house finches are a really great bird to notice. The males and females are super easy to tell apart. That's not always true with our yard birds. And it's a good thing to note that red the male is sporting on his chest. It's going to be on the rump, on those feathers just over the tail, as well as the neck and breast. Those are colors that he gains from the food he eats. It's not a pigment that he's capable of producing himself, so it's actually a really good indicator of health for the female to pay attention to when she's looking for a mate. The more brightly colored he is, the healthier he is, the better indication he's going to be able to help feed the young. Now our house finches are feeding mostly on plant material. They're very willing to visit your feeder and eat all manner of seed out of there. They're feeding mostly on things like seeds, the buds and fruits of plants. And when they're nesting, they're going to be nesting in trees, as well as taking advantage of any ledges on buildings. And they'll occasionally even use the abandoned nests from other birds. But these guys are super social. You're usually going to find them in flocks, and they're just a fun bird to pay attention to once you start seeing them. So, those are our house finches. That was your birding basics equipment. And it doesn't appear like we've got, or we'll be going through the questions at the end of this, which is in fact now. So, yeah, Chuck, I have to agree with you. The phones are only useful for animals smaller than an opossum. Of course, we're going to try to avoid actually having negative interactions with any of our wildlife, but you never know, there could be a really ornery feral cat following you around. So, I am going to leave you guys to the rest of your day. Matthew did comment he's hearing nestlings in the background. There is a nest of Buick wrens that is a couple of feet away from me. That was the very angry parent. They've accepted that I'm set up here. But we've got a nest of about 6 nestlings right now, and I'm very excited about it. And if I could get better pictures to share, I would. But they're all absolute potato quality because of lighting. So everyone have a really fantastic day. Take a moment to pay attention to your yard birds, even if they're just house finches and house sparrows, and have a really fantastic rest of your week.